halter. This is used in cattle to control the head after the animal is restrained in a chute.
This part here where you tighten it always goes on the bottom left of the cow. Okay? So for instance, you'll put it on like this. See, bottom left.
Bottom left.
Okay.
Okay. So you first put this one and after that over.
Yeah, or the other way around.
Okay.
That's better. Is it tight? It doesn't look tight. I think you need to tighten it more.
Tail restraint may be used for other injections to a cow.
And you want to grab it on the base, like this, and take it straight up, and push forward. Straight up, push forward. You don't need to grab at the end of the tail. You won't be able to grab the base, but gentle pressure like this works amazing restraining animals so you can check their udder or anything else behind. You don't need to get crazy. You can break a tail doing this. With the proper amount of force, you can do all the work you need on the cow.
Nose lead. This can be used for intravenous injections, poop examination, or other surgery. Squeeze chute is a mechanical head restraint.
The area that we choose, or the landmark, is basically running right down midline of our cattle's tail, the coccygeal groove. And this groove can be palpated digitally like this. But ultimately, the basic principle is always remember that the vein runs on midline. So that's the direction that we're going to try to aim for, is right on midline. So we'll use a small syringe with a needle. We'll steady our hand onto the side of the cow's tail like this, and then we'll look for midline for this cow, and we'll actually insert the needle into the tail. Hopefully we're within the coccygeal vein or artery, and then we'll pull back and we'll obtain a blood sample from the coccygeal vein, it looks like. And then once we're finished, we'll actually put pressure with a clean part of your gauze onto the area that we drew blood from. And then we'll use the blood on a test to determine ketone body levels in this cow. I'll use my 4 fingers and place them deep into the jugular furrow to allow for the jugular vein to distend. You can visually identify the jugular vein as it distends. Continual pressure will continue to allow distension of the jugular vein until it can actually be visually seen as well as palpated. Once you identify that, you can steady your hand onto the animal's neck, and when you're ready to penetrate through the skin with the needle, you must choose your spot and you must actually go pretty quickly. You cannot place the needle onto the skin of the surface of the animal because she will negatively react to that. So once you've identified your spot, steadied your needle, your hand, then place the needle into the jugular vein. And then once you're into the jugular vein, you draw back, you get blood. Once you get blood, you can dispense the large volume of medicine intravenously. Release your hands away from holding off to allow the medicine to clear the area, and then completely remove the needle out of the cow's vein. Hands right there.
Hey Amy, Carly's gonna
Take two.
much food. Awesome. Woo!
Yay!
Many times we have to administer large volumes of fluids, as many as 10 gallons to these cattle to help rehydrate, to supply certain electrolytes. In order to get that procedure done, we actually have a different setup. This setup involves 3 components. It involves a fric speculum. This fric speculum is placed into the mouth, and the cow is allowed to chew on the fric speculum, and that will protect our tube, which is the next component. This is a nasogastric tube. In this case, for our cattle, it's actually passed orally, so it becomes an oral gastric tube. But in order for us to protect our tubes, which can be quite expensive, we don't want her chewing and creating holes in our tube, so we protect it with a fric speculum. So first the fric speculum will go in place, then the tube will be passed down the fric speculum, and then once it's in the rumen, we made sure that it's in the rumen, then we attach the end of the tube to the large volume pump that we use here, and this pump will actually pump a large volume of fluid through the tube and into the rumen. This is a very, very serious type of procedure because one major complication with this procedure is actually administering a large volume of fluids into the lungs instead of the stomach of our animals. So we want to make sure that we're not in the lungs for these animals. And there's many different checkpoints along the way when securing this tube down the esophagus and into the rumen that we must observe in order to make sure we're in the rumen. The first checkpoint is actually whenever we pass this tube into the pharyngeal area of the mouth. The first thing as a bovine veterinarian to remember is that our cattle are indiscriminate eaters. So generally they will swallow more than 99% of anything that's placed into the pharyngeal area. So that's your first thought process, in that mostly when we pass this tube, it will actually enter the esophagus and end up in the rumen. But for you to be very sure that that's the case, then what you may want to have happen is you may want to do your checks along the way. So the first thing is, if you pass the tube into the animal's pharyngeal area, and let's say we're in the esophagus, what will happen is when the person checks, they will apply negative pressure or suck back onto the tube, and the negative pressure of the esophagus collapsing against the tube will not allow any air to rush into the tube, and you will feel that there's something blocking the tube. That's your first very good indication that you're actually in the esophagus. If you're in the trachea and you apply suction, you will find that you will just get air straight through the tube into your mouth and no negative pressure. And that's a good indication that you're in the wrong place and you're in the trachea and not in the esophagus. Here, perfectly. And then I again will use my fingers to lift the left lip of her and rub the roof of her mouth to have her open her mouth. Then I place the fric speculum, again, rocking back and forth until I secure it over the top, just like then it went over the top of that big ball in her tongue. Now we'll insert the tube and slowly but steadily, yep, keep going. Negative pressure, negative pressure. You have it, perfect. We'll go, continue. Resistance is there, I can see it, resistance. Now he's gonna listen, listen. Air gurgling, very nicely. Air, I can hear it too. Smell. If it's a sour rumen, you most likely will pick up a pretty sour rumen smell. In this case, we're gonna now know we're in the rumen. We'll attach it to the pump. I will hang on to the tube just like I am at the end here for my assistant to hold it in place. And then we will slowly, yep, keep it pump back and forth, administering this large volume of fluids orally to this cow. You can see this cow is chewing aggressively on the fric speculum, but our tube is very protected from her creating a huge pile of plastic. Okay, that's good. So once we're done, we'll pump a few bit of air. So take it out of, yep, pump air, yep, to clear the tube. Then we'll take the tube off of the end of the pump. We'll pinch the tube very aggressively, pinch the tube, and then we'll walk straight back, taking the tube out of the cow. All the way out. Then I take the fric speculum out. Again, she'll have her typical Fleming response. That usually means you've got a very successful procedure, and that's administering a large volume of fluid to our dairy cattle.